Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Not Just Politics podcast. Today is Friday, January 24th, 2024. We are in a different studio today. This is the TV studio in the Center for Media Innovation, and we have a very special guest today. Allow me to introduce him. Studied American Studies at Dickinson College, for starters. Got a journalism degree from Columbia after that.
Yep.
And then a PhD at Point Park University in community engagement. You spent 3 years as a reporter for the Cincinnati Post.
Yes.
15 years as an investigative reporter for the Pittsburgh Tribune Review.
Right.
And you are the founder and assistant director of the Center for Media Innovation. The title.
Yeah. I'm the founding director, but then they gave me a fancy title. I'm assistant vice president and managing director.
That's what it is. I know it's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But you are part of the reason why we have this show. Award-winning journalist and author of 4 books. Breakaway, the inside story that built the Penguins' rebirth, The Color of Sundays, the secret strategy that built the Steelers' dynasty, All About Roberto Clemente, and your latest book, Death of the Daily News, How Citizen Gatekeepers Can Save Local Journalism, will be available for purchase at the link in the description.
Which one of these is not like the others? Right.
Right. That was the initial thing. So that was my first question: is what made the transition from sports into talking about news and media?
Yeah. Well, first of all, welcome to the CMI. So glad you're doing it in our TV studio.
This is a great
spot.
You
here.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Of course.
You should do it here, all the time.
We're actually talking about it. We just when we got in here this morning, we didn't realize that this desk was here. I just kind of slipped from my memory that it was here. So we actually are considering.
Good. Yeah. Everything moves around. Why did I switch? So I was never a sports reporter. I was the first book was this. I covered Pennsylvania when legalized gambling, legalized gaming was introduced to Pennsylvania, and the Pittsburgh Penguins tried to get a casino license. They were going to build a casino in the Hill District, and they were going to use the revenues to build an arena. And they didn't get the license, and then the Rivers Casino ended up getting it ultimately, and the team president of the Penguins kept saying, like, this is a book, you should do a book on this. And I was like, I don't know, like, if you've never written a book, it's really hard to like be like, I'm gonna write a book. But the Penguins got a deal for the arena, which was like very dramatic, I was there like front row seat for the whole thing. And then like 2 years later, they go out and they win the Stanley Cup, or a year later. And I was like, oh, that was a book. I should have written a book.
Yeah, right.
And so I did, and it came together, and it was a national bestseller. I did an interview with a station in Saskatoon. Do you know where that is? Yeah.
I'm terrible with directions.
Yeah.
No,
capital of Saskatchewan in Canada. It's a province. And
oh, wow. Okay.
And I was like, can you even get the book in Saskatoon? And I went and looked online, and there's a bookstore there. And they had multiple copies of it.
Wow.
So it was a cool experience. And then a friend said after that was like, hey, you should do a book on this guy, Bill Nunn, with the Steelers. And I was like, I don't know who that is. Turned out he was amazing, had this phenomenal story. And that book's been terrific. It got optioned by Netflix for a possible movie, but then they decided not to make the movie.
And and he's the guy that scouted players at historically like black colleges and universities, like talent that was being overlooked by the rest of the NFL.
Yeah, right. There's the Pittsburgh Courier is a newspaper here in Pittsburgh. It was through the 20th century one of the nation's 2 black newspapers. There's the Chicago Defender. I mean, there are other black newspapers, but these were the 2 prominent national ones. The Pittsburgh Courier had editions in like 13 cities. They had bureaus in 13 cities around the country. People were sending in stories. They were sending their stories out all across the country. This guy his job was for the Courier was to scout the black colleges and put together the black college All-American football team. And then the Steelers were like, we should hire this guy. And he's like, I'm not going to work for you. You never let me sit in the press box. You never listen to my advice and stuff. But then he did go and he joined the Steelers, and he went and found all these players that other teams didn't even know existed. And I make the case that's how they won their first 4 Super Bowls. Was like was a big part of it. I mean, there's a lot of components, but that was a key part of it. And then Roberto Clemente is a children's book. It's for like early readers. And then the 4th book was out of my PhD dissertation. And,
Gotcha. Okay.
And what I learned from the Color of Sundays book was like I could do the same kind of research on anything.
Right.
Death of the Daily News is about the city of McKeesport that had a newspaper for 131 years, and the paper closed, sort of almost like overnight, and the politicians there at first were like, this is amazing, nobody's going to be asking us questions anymore, it's incredible. And then they realized very quickly, within weeks and months, that they were like, oh no, nobody's going to tell our stories either, like we're screwed. And then and the residents, they very much wanted to still know what's going on in their community. And so their four business owners down there said, like, we're going to start our own newspaper. And they've been running it successfully for about a decade now. And the book is about like what happens, how do people figure out what goes on in their community? So.
Yeah, actually, apologies. Could you hand me that? Hand me that backpack that's right there.
Oh, yeah. Now I'm your lackey. Right. Good,
Sorry.
Good. That's all right.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I dropped it. Sorry.
I forgot to. I just realized I forgot to bring I forgot to bring it out.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
With me here so that people can see it, and I'll edit it in the end. But this is the book. It was really good. I very much.
You read
enjoyed
it?
Yeah, I did.
Okay,
yeah,
cool. Yeah,
I really enjoyed it. There's some stuff a lot of stuff I want to talk about in there. For starters, one thing that I hadn't thought about and that was kind of surprising was when you talked about the economic correlation between a news desert and a food desert.
Oh, right.
And how a newspaper, in a lot of ways, actually contributed to the economics of a town in the way that people hadn't considered.
It's a symbiotic relationship. The newspaper, have a successful newspaper now, you need to have enough commercial advertisers in your community to support a newspaper. So it's one thing to have a weekly newspaper in Sewickley, which there is one, and Sewickley's a well-off community, lots of businesses. You're going to have lots of advertisers, and they want to reach the community, and they want stories about it. But in a place like McKeesport, where there's such economic decline, it's really hard to keep a newspaper going. There aren't enough, under the traditional model, there aren't enough advertisers to support a publication. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it carries, like you said, like the same economic causes that lead to a news desert are similar to the ones that cause a food desert. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I hadn't necessarily thought about it like that, but it does make sense.
Yeah.
Whenever you broke it down. And so for the people that are listening, how citizen gatekeepers can save local journalism. Can you explain what you mean by citizen gatekeeper?
Are there people listening?
There are. Well,
that's great.
The Paul brothers
All right.
are the biggest fans of this show.
Okay, there we go. Okay,
yeah.
great. All right.
Everybody famous you've ever heard of is tuning in.
Okay, they're tuned in.
Yes.
What was your question?
What
is a gatekeeper?
Yes, a citizen gatekeeper.
So like in a traditional news model, you've got editors who serve as gatekeepers to information. So there's all the news that's taking place in the world. Somebody has to make sense of it. And so the example I give in the paper in the book is this famous study from the mid 20th century where was one wire editor in a small town, and that person has to decide what stories are going into the paper. And this guy was conservative, and so he was only putting in conservative stories.
Sure.
He didn't like Catholics, so he wasn't putting in stories that made the Pope look good. He was making decisions, but that one person was deciding what everyone in that town was reading, basically, about the outside world. And what is happening now in our digitally connected world, there's so much information out there, but individuals act as gatekeepers. So whenever you go on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok and you're sharing content, you're making a decision about, well, this is something of value that I want other people to know about. The people in my circle, I want them to know about. And it's a marrying of those two concepts. And I don't think people hadn't really understood that. I mean, certainly citizens, for the most part, don't understand that they're doing a form of journalism when they're sharing content and creating content. But even journalists haven't also acknowledged that citizens are doing that. And that was what I'm trying to do with the book, is like say, this is a major change going on here. And I think it redefines what it means to be a journalist, but the industry hasn't caught up with that yet.
And you think that fighting that is a futile thing?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You can't fight it. Like,
right, it's going to happen.
The places that are fighting it are dying. I think what's really crystallized for me lately is that I think the public is saying to journalists, like, I don't need you to tell my story anymore. Like, I have an outlet to tell my story. I'm already telling my story. I want you to help me tell my story better. And so my vision for it is like successful journalists and news outlets in the future will harness the power of everyone in their community who's already sharing content. You can harness that and help people understand what's accurate, what's objective, what's relevant, and help those stories rise to the top. But you no longer need to go out and be the one who tells the story for the people in the community. You need to listen to them first.
And when you say the places that are fighting it are dying, what are the main? Who are those? What are those places that are trying to fight it? Like any big ones that people would?
Yeah, I mean, there are like thousands of newspapers have died. They're closing all across the country.
A lot of the legacy.
Pittsburgh's one of the largest cities in the United States that doesn't have a daily newspaper. Like, we don't have a daily printed newspaper any longer in Pittsburgh. You can only get a paper here. The Tribune Review still prints, but it prints in the suburbs, so it prints in Greensburg and Tarentum every day. And they had a Pittsburgh edition, but they got rid of that. And the Post Gazette still puts out content every moment, right? On the internet, but they only print a paper on Thursdays and Sundays, and so other days of the week you don't get a printed newspaper. And that's another thing that's kind of lost, is that Pittsburgh's an outlier that way.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Daily paper.
Yeah, no daily printed newspaper. And that we've gotten used to it here in Pittsburgh because it's just the reality. But you go to other cities and it's, they still have a printed paper, and there's a big difference.
That's crazy. So another thing that you mentioned in the book, and this is absolutely a sentiment that I've picked up on in class, is that there is a contentious relationship between citizen journalists and professional journalists, right? My argument would be that there are citizen journalists that are professional, that are at times more professional than the professional journalists. And I would argue the other way around. I would argue that they're both true. Do you see that changing at all?
I think it has to.
Okay.
The challenge with news outlets is that it's hard for them to change because they're constantly putting out content. They're focused on how do we put out all the news of whatever our coverage area is today, of the moment as it's happening. It's hard to also step back and say, well, we need to rethink our model and do something completely different.
Right.
But you see places like the Tribune Review experimenting with new ideas. The Trib sponsored a cohort of citizens to come through the CMI and get journalism training a year ago.
That's cool.
And so it was 12 people. 3 people came and enrolled on their own. The other 9 were sponsored by the Trib. And we put them through 9 2-week courses on all the basics of journalism, how to do an interview, how to create an image, how to create content, how to even market yourself and make money. And then the Trib has hired some of those folks, and there was another news outlet in Huntington, PA, and they've also there were 3 people from their paper. Those people are contributing to the paper up there. I think something like that is the future, but I also think it might not be as formal as that. It might just be people are already sharing content. They're already doing it, and the attitude from professionals has always been, well, that's something else. It's on the outside. It's not trustworthy. And they're correct in some ways. It's not trustworthy. It's confusing if you live in a community and you try to follow a Facebook group and you're hearing all these crazy things. I live in Mount Washington. There's a Facebook group called Neighbors on the Mount, and people,
they sound like fun.
Yeah, right. People post things like, I saw a helicopter flying over part of the neighborhood. What's going on? People are like, they don't know. Nobody knows what's going on. Or like somebody said there was this week there's a smashed up car on Grandview. What happened to the car? Nobody knows what happened to the car. Or then people start making jokes about it. There's this other weird thing that's been going on. There were like thousands of crows have settled on Mount Washington.
Really?
Yeah, in the winter. I don't know what's going on. Like inside our house this week, you could hear the crows. It was like that movie, The Birds. Like there were like thousands of crows circling around. It's super weird.
I bet neighbors on the Mount had fun with that one.
They did, yeah. So they've been posting. Neighbors have been posting like, "What's up with the crows?" And like then people are trying to explain it, and other people are making jokes about it, and yeah. So
sounds like something like my uncles would be like a big fan of.
But every community, like wherever you're from, there's probably a Facebook group for it, and it's probably just as disorganized.
So when it comes to the collapse of newspapers and this dramatic shift in the media landscape, do you have any advice? Not to put you on the spot. Do you have any advice? And there's obviously stuff you talk about in the book, but advice for young media practitioners out there that want to go out there and try to make a change and want to try to get trustworthy local news coverage back into their communities?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I will say that, I teach here at Point Park as well.
Yes.
And I would say that this fall, I saw a dramatic shift in our students, the incoming students, first-year students. They were... 2/3 of the students in the class were already creating content on a regular basis. They were like, I've got a podcast already, or I've got a social media account or TikTok or whatever, and I'm already doing this. And then later in the semester, we were talking about, this course was about like history of media. And so we were like, do you know when the smartphone was invented? Do you know what year the smartphone came out?
2001?
No.
2007.
2007, yeah. 7 kind of looks like a 1, so
I was a little ahead.
Yeah.
2007.
But then I said to these students, I was like, well, what grade were you in when you got, when this happened? And they were like, well, grade? What are you talking about? We were like 2 or 3. I was like, oh, wow. So you grew up with like smartphones in the cradle. Like from the moment you could talk, you had
5.
access to a smartphone. 5 for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's 5.
And I think that there's like an innate ability, like it's just natural to create content and to have this device that is attached to you and creates content.
Jake Paul calls them digitally native. Digitally native. That's the term Jake Paul uses.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of a fan of the show. Yeah, that's what the term that he uses. Like these kids, like you said, this is kind of all they know. Like the digital world to them is more real than the real world around them.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think there's a lot of truth in that, right? I mean, we see it like on, we've had the weather here has been cold lately. We've had snow days, and you see a lot of young people going into their digital world rather than going into their real world to go play in the snow or the cold. They're going online and doing gaming and creating avatars and
and they're farming crypto. Some of them, I'm sure.
Yeah,
farming. Did you know that someone? A random aside. This is crazy. Somebody built a computer that can mine Bitcoin in the game Minecraft.
Okay. You mean like a real Bitcoin or just like
real
Minecraft?
Bitcoin.
Okay, so
they built a computer in Minecraft in the game that can store enough information to mine like 0.0002 cents of Bitcoin a month or whatever, or a year, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah,
so that's what they're doing, right? The digital world is here, right?
It is,
Trump and Melania made $56 billion off of those shit coins that they put out.
It was ridiculous.
That's a rough one.
The thing that I think about too are you remember like there was that craze for NFTs for a while?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And it was like, this is the future of art. Every piece of art's gonna.
My brother made some.
Okay, yeah. And did he make money off of it?
I don't think so.
Right.
But it was like a thing they were working on.
I mean, and some people were spending. They had a lot of extra cryptocurrency at that point, and they were spending a lot of it on it. And it looked like, this is going to be the future, but then it ended up not being the future. It's kind of like receded. And it might come back at some point.
The technology, from what I understand, the technology is potentially the future. But, but buying a picture of an ape that costs more than a house, it cannot.
Nobody
be.
cares.
It's not sustainable.
Right.
Wow. And you know what's really funny? I was thinking about is the term early 2020s is now something we can use.
Okay.
because we're halfway through the decade. So we can now say early 2020s. That was a fever dream. I think we've just left it or something. I can't quite tell.
What do you think there are people out there like, what do they do with their NFTs now? They're like, I put this digital screen up in my house to
Gary
show off
V
my
has
NFT.
a ton of them. I know that. I know Gary V has a ton of NFTs. I don't know what he's doing with them.
Does he show them?
Well, I think whenever the crypto market goes up, the NFT market also does well. So
yeah, I mean,
they're
it
probably
makes
on the
sense.
up right now.
Right, yeah.
But who knows what that's going to be. Right now, we are, as we've discussed, we've seen unprecedented and irreversible democratization of media in the world. And at the same time, it seems like the power is being concentrated into smaller and smaller places, like corporations just buying up. I mean, how much of the market does like the tech companies? I mean, they own some ridiculous amount of the market. In the book, I got to pull it up because there's a quote that I like that I wrote down. In chapter 2, you wrote, "Journalism, perhaps like never before, belongs to the people rather than to professional journalists, wealthy publishers, or corporate shareholders. The same technology that has shifted the balance of power toward the people gives them the tools to act as broadcasters and publishers of information essential to their immediate community, and more critically, to serve people around them." So, and I think you're talking more locally in the, obviously talking locally in the book, and that's more of a I guess a national or a global phenomenon of that purchasing of so many companies. How do you see that? Like, that's a weird dichotomy, isn't it?
Well, I would say at the national level, it's not like citizens have access to ask questions of the president, but what you see instead is a filtering of the news. People are being gatekeepers of information and sharing it, and then reacting to what's going on out there. And so not doing journalism, but more like commentary. And the more ridiculous, outrageous things are drawing more attention. So there's that. The other part you're talking about is that at the local level, citizens have, I'd say, they have more control over local information before, but
Definitely.
But hedge funds and corporate investors are buying up the newspapers, the traditional media. I just think we're at an inflection point where the reason the hedge funds are buying newspapers is not because they see a future for local newspapers. It's because they can wring profit out of it. They'll wring the last pennies out of it. Yeah, right.
It goes away.
So this is like this is the end of that process and the beginning of a new process where citizens are going to have control over the local news.
And then I guess on the other side, in new media, you have a company like Google, which controls YouTube. It seems like if any of these companies are going to stick around long term, it's probably Google.
Well, I mean, they're publicly traded. They have billions of dollars.
Sure, but I just mean like it's going to be tough to compete. Like Google, I think, is probably always going to be the king of the hill. I imagine, just because of the amount of market share that they have.
Except if
the amount of data.
I mean, it probably won't happen now, but the government was taking steps to break up Google, just like they broke up Standard Oil in the early 20th century.
Do you see that actually going through? Because the way that I look at it is that there's so much dark money in that system that could those corporations not just slip money into the? Not to sound
I think
cynical,
if you look at it from a historic perspective, it makes sense that eventually governments will step in and break up the big tech companies.
Okay,
that's what happened with big oil. It happened with big television.
Sure.
When radio moved into television, then the government got involved and was like, okay, you can't control all the TV stations. You have to split this up. So I think it does make sense that it will, either happen through government regulation or through government pressure, or, because the companies will realize like, oh, we have to diversify. The one I look at though is Facebook, because of all the local Facebook group administrators. Facebook could solve the journalism problem in this country if they gave some training and guidance to the Facebook group administrators, but it doesn't fit in their business model. They would make money, but they wouldn't make enough money. They're making more money doing other things. And in fact, now you see them stepping back from even, they're not going to do fact checking anymore. They're stepping back from that role of like being involved in controlling media, but they still have this network around the world of volunteers who are trying to make sense of the information in their community, even if it's just thousands of crows flying overhead.
Yeah. Or a car that's just been.
Yeah.
By the way, have you ever seen a car just smashed?
Like a smashed up car? Like,
how many times have you just walked down the street? Oh, there's a smashed up car.
Yeah, sometimes like in New York City, you'll see a car that's like all smashed up, but it's not common around here. But I think probably what happened up there was what they were asking was like somebody parked on the street, and then we get like drunk drivers that come out, and then they run into it, and then they take off, and meanwhile your car's all smashed up.
Oh, right, it's a hit and run.
Yeah,
that's what they were more concerned with. Okay, yeah. Do you think that over time that old media is going to, like, do you think eventually these two forms of media are going to eventually kind of end up in the same place, in the sense that, like, for example, like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they all have stuff on YouTube currently that pulls in, I imagine, just as many views or more views than their linear television programming does. So do they eventually just go, you know what, let's just, if the kids aren't watching linear TV anyway and everyone's doing YouTube in 20 years, doesn't everyone just kind of become a YouTube operation?
Right. I mean, you see, CNN has just announced that's what they're doing, right? They're ramping up their streaming side.
Oh, did they just announce?
Yeah,
I did not see
in the last few days, yeah.
Okay.
That they're shifting away from TV and more to streaming.
Oh,
not that they're never going to abandon TV, but I think that they see the future, just like you said, the future is streaming. And when you think about what happened to the Pirates locally, right? So the Pirates had their channel was only on cable TV, and everyone who got cable had the channel, or you could bring it on as an add-on. And the Pirates were making less money from it. But we got to the place where enough people had cut the cord on cable and were streaming that the Pirates now had to set up a network for streaming.
Right.
And you can still get it over cable, but, other people. But the challenge for them now is that for cable, it's just like you turn it on and it's always there, right?
Right.
But for streaming, like when the Pirates were exciting in the beginning part of the season, they didn't turn on their streaming until like middle of the season, but I was clamoring for it early. And then when they did turn it on, I was like, oh, I want this. I turned it on. But then by the end, 2/3 of the way through the season, it was like, oh, they're out of it. They're tanking. I don't care anymore. I turned off streaming. And so now like the Pirates they missed out on that revenue. So it's more incentive for them to have a better team.
Sure. Yeah, right. I was going to say maybe Bob Nutting will finally
maybe
clean it up over there.
If that's a way for...
You ever met him?
Yes.
You have?
Yeah.
Interesting. How many times?
I don't know. I met him in different settings.
Okay.
I think the family is very sincere. They're interested. They own a bunch of newspapers too.
They do?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Ogden Publishing. They own
they own Seven Springs, don't they?
They used to. They sold it to Vail.
Gotcha.
Okay. Resort, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so that would be hopeful. I mean, it would be nice. It would be nice if we could get another World Series over here. I don't even care about baseball, but it would be nice just to get another flag outside PNC Park. 1979 isn't. It would be nice to get a 2 up there.
79 was amazing. I remember 79. Yeah. I was born in 71. I think they won 71, right? And so, because my mom always talks about taking me out to the celebration and watching that. And then 79, I went to the World Series.
Nice.
It's amazing for one game.
That's one of those things like that. And some people have talked about this, that is an experience that like you'll never get it again. No one, like, it doesn't matter. Like, you listened to that on the radio, doesn't matter. You were there. Like, there's something about that live experience that, like, it feels like with new media is like everything is through the screen of our phones. It's like you miss out. It feels like you miss out on something.
The one that really sticks with me is the Steelers. Because I grew up, I was alive for all the Steelers' first 4 Super Bowls, but I was really young. Yeah. Watched them on TV. I had like a homemade terrible towel. I've got like all these things that I grew up with. It was part of the culture. But then the Steelers went into this long slump of which 25 years without, where they weren't really great. And then when they won Super Bowl, they went to the Super Bowl in the middle of there, and they lost the Super Bowl. But so they were up and down. But when they won Super Bowl XL, I forget what year that was, 2005?
My cousin could tell you.
Yeah.
I have a cousin that can name every Super Bowl winner
in
order. All of them.
Really? Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know what people use that in their brain. But I was on the newspaper sent me out to cover the fan reaction. I was on the South Side, and it was one of the most exuberant, exciting sports moments of my life.
Yeah.
Just because like they finally won another Super Bowl and they brought it back. So these dark periods that we're living through now, where like the team is like okay but not great, that all builds up the anticipation for like this great outpouring.
Oh yeah, it'll next time they get one.
I would think the most exciting sports moment of my life is when the Pirates rather had a 1-game playoff against Cincinnati, and what was that? This last round when they were in the playoffs, and the Johnny Cueto game. Do you know this? Where?
Oh, I'm not a big baseball. I'm not really a big sports.
Cueto,
watcher,
the fans started. We had great seats for the game that I'd gotten from the newspaper, and I was there with my family, and the crowd starts chanting the pitcher's name, Cueto, and he realizes at this point they're calling out my name, and he dropped the ball. The ball fell out of his glove, and I've never seen the fans have that kind of impact on the pitcher.
Crazy.
And then he picks up the ball, tries to compose himself. The very next pitch he throws, home run, goes out of the ballpark, and it was crazy. I'm getting chills thinking about it. It was like
crazy.
It was such an amazing. Baseball has it's a very romantic sport and has the possibility to give you those kinds of moments. But the way that MLB is set up, it's so unfair for small market teams. You can't compete against the Mets and the Dodgers when they're spending many hundreds of millions of dollars. And
what did they give that? Was it the Dodgers that gave that guy the new biggest sports contract in history?
What was it, like $500 million?
700 and
okay.
770 something. Gavin, could you look that up real quick? It's the Dodgers had a new contract with somebody, like a big contract. Like I think it's the biggest sports contract in history.
Yeah.
I think it's for 15 years.
I think Mahomes was he was like a $500 million guy, and that was like a big
and that was
deal.
huge. Yeah.
But
and then they gave they gave Tom Brady all that money that he put into FTX. Fun. Lost it all.
Yeah. And then I think that when he's getting sued over it too, right? Isn't he?
Is he?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That guy's.
But I heard he's making more money from TV than he made as a quarterback, even, which is
he
ridiculous.
probably is.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, because I remember hearing about that. Like FTX went down, and it was like Tom Brady had hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, because he was a spokesman for them too.
He was a spokesperson.
Right.
You know that guy's in a cell.
Oh,
It was a Dodgers. They gave a contract to I forget his name, but it was like a big $700 million contract that they gave him. Either way, no.
It's interesting that you guys don't follow baseball, right? Like there would have been a time like a generation ago though, like young men would have been like, but now you have so many other things to entertain yourselves that you're like.
Yeah, I'm not a big. Professional disc golf is the only sport that I actually follow. Yeah, it's the only one that I follow.
I have a new friend who's got. He's really into it, and trying to get me to go out. But
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I play all the time.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun. No, but I don't. I'm not really like big baseball.
Right.
The only time I was really into sports was when Penguins got their back-to-back in 16-17. That was the only real time that I gave it a shot to try to be into sports, and it kind of faded away again.
Yeah.
But
I think that should scare these big sports leagues that there's so much competition for attention now that they're in the mix. But on the flip side, like the NFL is still
people are the NFL is huge, but people are podcasting now. The MLB better watch out for podcasting.
You think that professional podcasting will replace?
Yeah. Well, I mean, would you not argue with me that right now, culturally, podcasting is more of America's pastime than baseball?
Certainly podcasting is growing and will eventually touch more people.
This will be the new America's pastime.
The new pastime,
is just
That's a big responsibility. Are you prepared for it?
Well, that's a part of the reason I think why you're here today is we have to discuss this because there's many people out there. I suggested, and someone on Instagram, someone brilliant, I don't know who it was, but they should run for president because they said forget a gun buyback program. How about a podcast buyback program for all straight white men? And I said I'd be first on the list. I said, I'll send this right back to you.
Everyone who's like created 2 or 3 podcasts and then stopped should have to turn it back.
You have to send it all back.
Yeah, send it back.
If you're in your late 20s and you're starting up a podcast with your buddies in a basement, I'm a free speech guy, but it's enough now. We gotta get it out of here.
I actually think
Buyback
this is
program.
the revolution.
Is this the revolution?
It is the revolution. It's what what we were talking about before earlier. I think it is the revolution that everyone. The challenge is like how. You read the book, the example of the Huffington Post, where the Huffington Post is like, we're going to turn on, anybody can post their story on the Huffington Post.
Yeah, and it was almost like a chat room in a way, like heavy interactivity.
It was like it was a news site, but anybody could put up a story.
Sure.
And then after a few years, they were like, "This is insane. We have to turn this off." Like everybody's putting up stories, like you can't tell what's happening because everyone's doing it.
Right.
That's where we are with podcasting and all media right now. Is there like there's so much being shared out there that it turns into noise, and it's hard to make sense of it. But I think that's the future of journalism: is how do you make sense of all the content that's already out there?
Yeah, and that's interesting to think about, that the role of a journalist might no longer be to exclusively make new content, but it might be to highlight the stuff that is true, that the community is putting out there.
I don't need you to tell my story anymore, but
Right.
I want you to help me do a better job of it. And I
Right.
want you to elevate the stories that make sense. As a consumer, I want you to tell me what's happening. Pointing to the people that I can count on.
And do you think that that's a way that I guess now that's not old media anymore, right? If journalists have that new role, that's no longer old media. That's something new. So is that a way for old media to move into a new place and start to gain people's trust again?
Yeah, I think that's why people don't trust it, because like I was giving the example, like you wouldn't ask somebody to come in your house to change the temperature on your thermostat, right? You're like, that'd be creepy.
No, that's dumb. I can change.
Right. Right. It's dumb and it's creepy. But if your furnace breaks, you need an expert to come in and fix your furnace. Mm-hmm. Journalism is kind of the same way now. People are like, I don't need you to tell my story because look at me, I'm already doing it. Like, I don't trust you to come do it. It's creepy when you come in my house and try to tell my story or my neighborhood. But
isn't that kind of a shame, though?
But when it breaks, I need your help to make sense of it.
Right. Isn't that kind of a shame? It's kind of a shame, isn't it, though? Because it used to be that you knew those people that worked for the paper. They were your friends, or you trusted them, and
you still can. But I'm saying, like,
sure,
in this new paradigm that I'm talking about, you have people that you trust in your community, but they're the ones they're not necessarily telling the stories. They're just listening to the stories that are being told and saying, "This is true. This is relevant. You need to hear more of this." I want to give you the example of, like, we had a program that was called All Abilities Media, and it was for people with all kinds of different disabilities and gave them the power of, use the technology of media to help them tell their stories. So we had this woman who was, she's like in her early 50s now. I think she's 52, and she has Down syndrome, and she wanted to create her own podcast. And so she came to us, was like, I want to create a podcast. She wanted to be a broadcaster. She didn't know about podcasting. We're like, well, you can create a podcast. And so she worked with a producer to create a show, a series of shows. But one of the shows was she interviewed her parents about what it was like to raise a child with Down syndrome. What?
Yeah.
So, like, 10 years earlier, she would have had to wait for a professional journalist to say, I have an interest in Down syndrome. I'm going to learn about Down syndrome, and then I'm going to do a story about what it's like for somebody to, raise a child with Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. That's okay.
Sure.
But it's like a step removed from the person themselves saying, I can do that myself now. I can ask the questions. I can interview my parents and tell what is 100% an authentic story because I actually am living it. That's the difference we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then it becomes the role of the journalist to say, hey, there's this person in the community who's doing this thing. You should hear them.
Right.
Yeah.
That does seem like that's probably a more efficient way to do it too. Like, you think, because then you're not just waiting around for someone to come do it for you.
It's more authentic.
Yeah, right. And it's more, right.
The original concept of news deserts, which I talk about in the book too, is
Yeah.
like it wasn't like the folks at Northwestern measure news deserts by counties that don't have any any newspaper, or they only have one newspaper. But that's not what we're talking about in the original format. The original idea of it is a woman who's in the city of Chicago saying, there are all these TV stations, there's 2 newspapers, there's all these local newspapers. Nobody's telling the story of my community from my perspective in an authentic way that is true to me because I live here.
Yeah.
That was the original concept of news desert. And I think that we have to honor that going forward by saying, no matter how many media outlets are out there, how many journalists are trying to tell stories, if we're not telling the stories authentically from the people who live in the communities, they're going to be suspicious of us.
Agreed. I wanted to go back to something from the book. I forgot to ask you this earlier when we were talking about that study that was done about the news editor that would get all the stories and it would, to red on one of them or whatever he would write. Do you think that because of that study, it seems like now there's more of a conversation that's being started, and I can't tell exactly where in the media landscape it's happening. I don't know if it's hit mainstream yet, but I think it's close, of sort of talking about media bias and trying to educate people about what that is and what that means. And there's been some people that come on the show, people that I interned for that cover that sort of thing at all sides. But do you think that's something that newspapers are going to have to take more of a conscious effort to maybe get an editorial board that has a conservative, a progressive, and maybe a centrist on it, or somebody apolitical or a libertarian, just to cover the blind spots that person might have for what's going to go into the paper?
Yeah, so the American Press Institute is working on an interesting experiment in Pittsburgh. I haven't checked in with them for a while, so I'm not sure how it's playing out. But the concept was they did some studies saying, articulating there's a lack of diversity in Pittsburgh newsrooms and then in Pittsburgh's news coverage. And so one of their solutions to it was to do exactly what you said. They put together a panel of citizens that people would come on and off this panel on a regular basis, but a panel of citizens who would look at news coverage and say, you missed this story, or you could have told the story in a different way, or you're only telling it from one perspective. And I think that is an interesting check on the work of journalists, to have like the people saying, yeah, this is true to me or it's not. It makes journalists uncomfortable.
Sure.
Right? Let me tell you how it used to work. When I worked at newspapers, a group of people, usually a group of older white men, well paid, sometimes politically connected, and this is at multiple places where I worked, would make the decisions about what was going in the newspaper. They literally would meet several times throughout the day and say, yeah, this is a story, or no, that's not a story. And they would look at the wire stories and say, yeah, this is something we want to put in the paper, or no, we don't. And that becomes the official story, right?
Yeah.
And it was very one directional. So these people were deciding what the news was, and the audience could either buy the paper or not buy the paper.
Right.
But before the proliferation of the internet, you had very few choices for what your source of information was. Certainly before the internet, you would have had like the newspaper, maybe a radio station, maybe a TV station.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you took the paper because it was your only way to find out what was going on. And you might not even know that it was being filtered to you. You just thought that was the news. But you didn't know that there was a group of white men sitting in a room deciding what the news was to you, of all the news that's out there.
Right.
And now it's broken down. Anybody can go on and see what the news is.
Sure. Because that used to be, right, because they used to be the gatekeepers of the whole thing. Now it seems like the gatekeepers are algorithms.
Yes.
In a sense.
Yeah, right. You could make the case that the algorithms are showing you, they're making decisions.
They're making decisions. And
right.
I'm not sure if this is true or not. It just seems like to me that like the social media sites sort of understand their algorithms, but also there's some things that become popular that I don't really understand why. I don't know how much of new media you pay attention to.
Well, there was a guy, this guy Ben Smith, who he's got a news site now called Semaphore, but he was the New York Times public editor for a while, and then before that, he worked at BuzzFeed.
Okay.
And he wrote a book, and it was interesting because it was all about how there were these groups of people just trying to figure out how to get the most clicks, how to make something go viral is really where it started. And they ended up on different ends of the political spectrum, but they started in the same place. And the thing was, how can we make something appear in front of, many, many millions of people? Mm. And, what they found over time was, or some of them found, was that like the more outrageous thing you said, the more audience you could build for it. But there's an interesting moment in the book, to your point, where BuzzFeed is going along, it's building all this audience, it's being very successful, and then Facebook changed its algorithm, and the traffic just disappeared. Mm. And BuzzFeed's like, what happened? They had to go to Facebook and be like, what did you do? How did you change this? What can we do to change our processes so we can build our audiences back? Mm. It's an incredible amount of power that those social media sites have.
It's crazy. And now what's interesting is that the conversation that I've heard in class is, and this didn't happen to my account, but apparently a bunch of people's, like everyone just started following POTUS on Instagram. Like mass people, they followed the account for you, which I super do not. I don't care.
So they just started like putting it in your feed.
Yeah, like it was the top of people's feeds. Whether or not, for some people, is whether they engage with that content or not.
Yeah, right.
I didn't see that. I don't care who it is. I don't like them following people's accounts for me. I don't care if it's Kamala Harris. I don't care who it is. Don't follow account. I've done they're ruining a good thing. Okay, here's what they're doing. They're ruining the algorithm that I've taken so much time. They've collected all my data to make me this perfect algorithm, and now they're going to ruin it, making me follow the president. They're ruining their own good thing here.
The weird thing too is like, I don't know how to fix it. Like I went to Ireland a few years ago when my daughter was studying in Ireland, and so I started getting all this stuff in my feed about Ireland, which was great. It was fascinating. But now I've kind of moved on. I'm still getting all this stuff about Ireland. Right. And I want to get like, we went to Croatia last summer and it didn't switch over. Like I didn't get all this Croatian stuff. Like
maybe you have to.
I want you to like give me what I want, not what you think I want.
Start talking trash about Ireland. Maybe.
I know. Yeah, I've actually like.
Will pick it up.
I've tried to do some things like that to like, what can I do to like goose the system, but it hasn't worked.
That's rough. It's really funny. I made a joke in class because it's really funny is that the people that like know me understand whenever I'm joking, but the people that don't know me don't really know. So I told,
and I will say you're kind of a mystery. I don't know if you know that, but you're kind of like an enigma, I think, to other people around.
Really? See, that's what I picked up on. And what do you think? Why do you think that is?
I don't know. You're engaged, but I think you don't. I think one, because you're so concerned about being objective and this idea that you've committed yourself to of like of trying to, bridge these divides. I wonder if maybe you hide your real feelings and your real truth, you hide it a little bit.
Sometimes I do. Some on some issues I just don't really have a take because I don't have any education on it, so I won't really say anything.
I don't even mean politics, but I just mean like.
Oh, sure.
Stuff.
Yeah. That might be true. But anyway, when Microsoft bought the power output from 3 Mile Island recently I would assume build a data farm. I would assume it's something. I proceeded to say that I was actually, because everybody was like, I'm not a big fan of that. Like, I'm not a fan of, whatever. There's objections to that I actually agree with many of them. But I just had to have a little bit of fun. And I was like, I actually think it's a good thing. And I said, because if my data is going to be collected, which it seems like I have no choice in at this point, I would like it to be done efficiently and on clean energy, and I would not like it to mess anybody up. If Bill Gates wants my data, I just want it to be, I just don't want to fuck up the earth while I do it. And the professor looked at me very confused, and so did a couple classmates, because I don't think they knew that was a joke or not.
Oh, yeah, right.
So
sounds sincere. I don't know. We just bought an electric car. It's been a real, that's been a transition. Buying
what'd you get?
The new Volkswagen bus.
Nice. Ooh, the Volkswagen bus.
Yeah.
It looks awesome. I saw the thing of that. Yeah. All
It's been
right.
fun, but it's a transition you really have to figure out. And now I had signed up for solar power before.
Yeah.
But now I need to go back and check to see like where my power is really coming from because I'm not sure. But
Yeah, that's a good point.
because like am I, I'm not really benefiting the environment if I'm still getting my power from fossil fuels, right?
Right. Yeah. Unless you switch over to solar, or unless you're on nuclear or something like that, then you don't really. And then because then you are doing coal or fossil fuels,
Yeah,
doing something
right.
dirty. Yeah, not good. What else is there? Oh yeah, that's something I wanted to talk about. So something we talked about with the new media thing is, or I guess with the new media thing, as you said, people now have more of an ability than ever to tell their own stories and to be the gatekeepers for their communities. The downside there, which I think we've kind of skirted around it, we haven't really talked about the misinformation thing yet, but that probably does seem to be new media's biggest hurdle. Would you argue with that?
Yeah, I think we didn't say the words misinformation or
we did not.
disinformation, but I think that was what we were talking about before.
Which I think those words are now being used so much that they are losing meaning.
Maybe
to me.
I mean, it's but that's what we were talking about before. Like there is, like in the book where the community loses its traditional news outlet. Now it's like there's so much misinformation,
Right.
where people are accidentally sharing
Neighbors
things.
on the mount.
Yeah, neighbors on the mount, and they're not trying to confuse you, but they are.
Sure.
And then in some places you see people deliberately coming in with disinformation and trying to create confusion.
Yes.
And that's what I'm saying. I think that's the role of the journalist, is to cut through all that and say, this is real, this is not real. Pay attention to these sources. Yeah.
Because the one thing that's been confusing me is that somebody said, I forget who put the piece out, but it was from one of the big news sources that something was being spread on social media as a misinformation campaign.
So that's disinformation.
Now, that's what I was going to say. Now, because those two things are mutually exclusive, right?
Right.
My understanding of misinformation is always the unintentional spreading.
Right.
So that can't be a campaign if it's misinformation,
yeah,
right?
it's a disinformation.
So that's why I'm getting a little confused. I feel like the narrative is being lost a little bit there on.
So then the question was that deliberate or inadvertent?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Getting very meta now. Yeah.
It is getting very meta.
But not that meta, like the actual meta.
I was going to say not Zuckerberg, but although I'm sure he'll get involved in something.
Probably is.
Recently.
Probably already is. Has his hand behind it somewhere.
Well, what's interesting is that the tech billionaires spent so long cozied up with the Democrats, and now it seems like there is some big. Obviously, Trump's been elected, right? That's a large cultural shift.
Were they cozied up with the Democrats, or were they actually trying to, as you just said, fight misinformation and disinformation? And now they're stepping back and saying, "We're not going to fight it all anymore. You guys figure it out." It's up to the public to figure it out.
My argument for why they had been cozied up with the Democrats would have been, despite the fact that the Trump administration did give money to Twitter to censor information, they took a largely disproportionate amount of money from Democrats. That would be an example, right? And those platforms have always kind of leaned left, right? I
see that people say this, they've leaned left, or CNN is left. I think just because you point out that somebody is lying or making up information doesn't make you a liberal. It just makes you.
Agree. No, that's not why I think they're left leaning. I don't think it's because they point out misinformation. I would say it would be because of something like the fact that. Well, no, and I guess another example. This might be a big can of worms to open now at this point in the program, but I guess one of my arguments would have been all of the narratives around COVID that shift. Now they were going to shift because it was science, right? And the people knew different things than they did now. I think the problem that I have is that the people that were taken off social media during the pandemic for saying things that were not following with what the mainstream outlets were saying, those people. Those accounts, as far as I know, have not been reinstated after the mainstream then came out confirming what those people had said. Now, whether or not those people said it with evidence or not, right? I don't think they did most of the time.
People died because so-called experts were going on social media and saying outrageous things about vaccines and masking.
Yes.
not because they believed it to be true, but because they wanted to build an audience and make money by building an audience. And they were saying things that were popular with the public who was fed up with masking and vaccines and staying home. None of us wanted to do that.
Right.
But instead of relying on good science, people were out there stirring it up for their own personal gain. And just because you step in and put a stop to that does not make you a liberal. It makes you a defender of the truth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, either way, it seems like now they're cozying up with Trump.
100%.
That does seem to be obvious.
Yes, we can agree on that.
They're cozying up with Trump. And so then maybe
they're saying now,
maybe this is a point where we agree, because I don't actually think that the tech people have real political leanings. I think they just follow the money.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. They probably do. We all have political leanings, right? But who knows what their real feelings are? But it's been fascinating to see over the last month how everyone's
they cozied up very quickly after.
The inauguration was like a display of that.
Sure. Yeah. Now, I guess would you? So then you would agree that they are, at least they seem friendlier to Trump now than they had been.
I think there's a realization among a lot of big media people that they either have to go along with the current administration or risk being regulated out of business and being cut out of business. And that's a scary moment, right?
Sure. Is there any part of the mainstream media establishment that is happy that he's back?
Yeah, of course, 100%. I mean, the first time when he was elected, that saved the New Yorker magazine. New York Times made a successful shift to digital publications. People benefited from it. Rachel Maddow is now she's on TV every night for the first 100 days of the Trump administration.
Really?
She's not doing that because it's good for her. She's not doing it because it's good for, the country. She's doing it because it's good for business. It's good for her, right?
Good for her.
It's good. Yeah. People are going to follow. They're going to watch. So yeah, there are a lot of people who are going to benefit from this moment.
Yeah, because that's always been my
all
feeling,
sides of it.
Is that I think in the abstract, they're not big fans of him. He says things that in the abstract they're not big fans of, but at the end of the day, they're kind of on a sinking ship. People, and he's a little bit of a life.
No, people make a career by being using Trump as a foil, right? I mean, you build an audience by saying outrageous things about this president,
or about the outrageous things that he says.
Yeah, I mean, Fox on the other side, Hannity now.
Yeah, they're thrilled.
Well, yeah, he had this exclusive interview with the president, and we saw with the voting machine scandal from 4 years ago that. That the Fox
crew, they're unshaken.
Right.
Unshaken by still zero evidence that the election was stolen. Yeah,
no,
they're unfazed.
Worse than that, we saw during the trial that there were examples where the evidence was presented and ignored. And,
right. Yeah.
That's why, Rudy Giuliani's trying to get trying to protect his condo in New York City right now, right? Because
do any of these people ever go away?
Everyone dies.
My grandchildren are going to be telling me about what Rudy Giuliani is up to at this point.
No, they're not. They'll talk about Trump because he's president. He came back. This is real history.
Of course, yeah, no.
But people come and go, and
I feel like Rudy Giuliani's had like three. He's in his fifth act at this point.
Yeah, I think it's hard for you to understand even. He was America's mayor.
Yeah,
he really was. He was like the most respected guy in the United States, and
because he was responsible for the sort of the crime
after that, and then after 9/11,
right?
He and of course George W. Bush was out there as president, but Giuliani was the guy in New York saying we're going to rebuild the city, we're going to do this, and hugely popular. Yeah, it's hard to imagine how it his career has turned. Yeah,
how quickly it's shifted.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, because that's the thing that hit me whenever we were in here for the election night watch party, and we had multiple different coverages up from different sources, and that's when I articulated that point because I was looking at the numbers and it was like, oh, okay, it's probably him.
Yeah, right.
When I had watched coverage of 2016 of those same sources, it was like, whoa.
Yeah,
Holy
2016 was
shit.
totally different.
You know what I mean? But this time around, it was like they didn't. It seemed like there was a different mentality, and I interpreted that as like the business model is saved for 4 years.
It was no, but I think you have to give more value to the election process itself. So in 2016, the polling was way off. They were showing that Hillary was going to win to the point where you had a lot of people saying, "Well, I'm just not going to vote for her because I'm going to give my vote to the third party candidates because she doesn't need my vote."
Sure.
And so then on election night, when Trump surged ahead and people were like, "Oh my God, I did not see that coming." That was a different sentiment. And then, in 2020 when Biden won and it took several days because of the pandemic and all the absentee ballots, that was its own dynamic.
That's true.
And, it led to Trump then saying, because he was ahead on election night, right?
That's
all
true.
the votes
That's a good point. It was a different situation.
But this time, he won handily. And so there have been, you could go back to the hanging chads of the Gore Bush election where it went on for weeks where people didn't know, and it went to the Supreme Court to have to decide, well, how are we going to decide the election? That's the one thing that's different about it this time around is that Trump won so handily.
Yeah,
and that that's why he feels he has a mandate to do the things that he's doing here in the first days of the new administration because he won by so much, and you have to hand it to him and his backers that let's see what happens because you convinced a majority of Americans that this is the direction the country should go in, so let's see what happens.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. It seemed like this time around he was ready to go. In 2016, it didn't seem like there was much into like I wouldn't be shocked if in 2016 he didn't even like know what he could do. Like I don't
think they even expected to win. They went
he had
the
no idea.
Right. Right. So
he was the most. I think he might have been the most surprised person in the room at that moment. He's like, I did it again.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Wow.
Did it? No, that is a good point. It was different because then I was talking to some people here like before the election, and we were kind of suspecting like, it's probably going to be because that's how the poll numbers were shaking out. Do we need to wrap up here? You have some?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We're about at time here. Well, thank you, sir.
It's been great though. It's been a good conversation.
I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We'd love to come back because there are you should come back if you'd be willing because there are because I feel now as Generation Alpha is now done. We now have a new generation of people going. We're now kind of in the sandwich, right? There's the boomers, and then there's.
You're just transitioning to something, either.
Well, we're just in the middle in the sense that we're sort of Gen Z sort of now in the middle of the Gen Xers and the millennials, and then there's two behind us now. So I feel a responsibility to sort of update you on where the media landscape is going.
Yeah,
and I think it will terrify you.
Oh yeah,
and I'm ashamed to show you some of it, but I think I will have to.
Go. We'd love to hear what you think of where it's going. Yeah.
That'll be next time.
That was I talked this whole time. It'd be good to hear what you have to say.
No, perhaps next time because there's. Are you on TikTok at all? Like, have you seen anything of what's going on there?
Yeah.
At all?
Yes. Yeah.
So you're horrified by
this is my job. What are you talking about? It says right here. It's the Center for Media Innovation. I have to stay on top of these things.
I didn't know if you'd seen the Costco family on TikTok or not.
I've not seen the Costco family.
Well, we'll have to introduce it because that's the part that's terrifying.
Okay.
How much of it are you genuinely terrified by, like that you see on TikTok? Like how
I'm
much?
inspired by it. That's what I'm telling you. Like that's the whole point. Like I'm inspired by this idea that people are.
This is a generational difference, right?
People are creating content. They're doing it on their own, and it might not be perfect, but we're gonna get to a point where
that's true. It is. It's in a weird place.
We're in an inflection point. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for
coming on. Bye, everybody.